So in most of the dungeons this season, there are some extracurricular things that you can do to be able to maintain and get buffs inside these dungeons. Typically, they're going to be related to professions, but sometimes they have things such as class-specific stuff, race-specific stuff, and sometimes there's just like buffs that are littered out through dungeons. And so I'm going to take some time today to talk about the buffs that you can get inside of the dungeons and how it's going to help you be able to complete the key. If you watched the last video that I made talking about all of the things that you need to know for all of the dungeons, I kind of covered these in each individual section for each of the dungeons, but I wanted to condense them down into one singular video just so it kind of made more sense. I also felt like it was maybe a little bit hard to understand what I exactly meant with some of the profession buffs and like how they were functioning. Also, I think I did a pretty poor job of showing exactly where they were sometimes. So first and foremost, let's talk about Stonevault. Whenever you end up going to the Master Machinist area, over to the right-hand side, there will actually be this anvil. On top of this anvil, there is an ingot. Whenever you have a dwarf, a dark iron dwarf, a warrior, or a blacksmith, you are able to give your party 10% versatility for 10 minutes. That does not persist through death. That's also very notable. Within a 20-yard radius. And whenever you have this buff, it's actually quite strong because, 10% damage, 5% DR is incredibly powerful. Typically what we've been looking to do in Stonevault is actually run towards the Master Machinists first, after the first boss, and then we end up getting this buff. We kill Master Machinist with this buff, with our Lust on the 10-minute timer, and then we start moving over to the Skarmorax area with the remainder of the buff to be able to maintain that 10% damage. We didn't find that it was like super great to actually take it into the last boss trash area. We found that the Skarmorax trash was a little bit more valuable for that 10% damage. Next dungeon we have Ara-Kara. Ara-Kara's buff is actually relatively simple. It's a tailoring based buff. It actually doesn't have any classes or race combos that affect it. It's a 12-second stun that you drag out of the corpse of these spiders. The notable thing is that they're actually present like pretty frequently in the dungeon. There's even one in front of like the last trash area, and they can be used on most mobs inside of the dungeon. The mobs that can't be used on, mini bosses that spawn the first boss, and bosses themselves. But beyond that, I found that it works on most mobs, including big mobs like the haulers at the end. I found that it even works on some of those larger beetles that give you your group the 50% DR. There's a lot of different mobs that the 12-second stun works on, and 12-second stuns are just in general pretty powerful. I don't know if you can oppressing roar it. I haven't really tested, although it would be kind of funny if that was something that you could possibly do. So having tailoring for Ara-Kara, while it's not the most impactful buff for your timer, having somebody that can pick these up, especially if you have a tailor in your group as a pre-existing buff, it's not bad. City of Threads probably has the most complicated profession buffs inside of the dungeons. First and foremost, the profession buffs are based around the race and profession combo of Engineering, Rogue, and Priest. Obviously, I don't know, I said race. There's no race, it's just classes. Engineering, Rogue, and Priest, basically what happens is you get a 15% healing and 15% damage gain for 25 seconds. Obviously very powerful, and these are located in 4 different spots, as you can see on screen here. What we were doing during the beta is we were actually kind of pulling around these nodes where we were getting the 15% DR, or 15% damage and 15% healing. We found that they were actually relatively strong, and so we thought it was pretty valuable to be pulling around them. They are in kind of awkward positions, but I think that once you find a way to be able to pull around them succinctly, it should be pretty solid. I think this is probably one of the stronger buffs that you can actually get inside these Mythic Plus dungeons. And at a high level, I think that Engineering, Rogue, and Priest is probably going to end up being mandatory for this dungeon. Obviously not required for, average or weekly keys, but very good for high-end keys. Mists is a weird one. So Mist of Tirna Scithe had something whenever Shadowlands was current, where you had a Night Fae in your group and you were able to activate multiple checkpoints and multiple walls that were inside of the dungeon. And so they kept part of this as thematic homage to Mist of Tirna Scithe, except they kind of allow you to interact with these in different ways. So the first checkpoint that's after the first boss, it's like this nut that you click on the left side. Now it's clickable by anybody. Anybody can click it. You don't have to have any profession. You don't have to be any race. There's no specific classes that can click it. You can basically click it if you're anything. The rest of those profession buffs are now based around Herbalism, Tauren, High Mountain Tauren, and Druid. Those are the specific combos of class, race, and profession that can click the first wall that's on the left-hand side, the mushroom wall, and the second checkpoint of the dungeon. Now, I've been doing this dungeon on M0, and something that I've noticed that's actually quite concerning is that Herbalism is actually not able to down the walls or click the checkpoint. So this is either a bug or maybe it's something that's not going to get fixed. But at the current time of recording this is not something that you can actually do with Herbalism, which is unfortunate, which you're supposed to be able to do. Now, these walls, I would describe so the mushrooms give you, similar to the Stonevault buff, 10% main stat for 10 minutes that does expire on death. So don't die with the mushrooms after you click them. And they're actually pretty good. They're the green mushrooms. I would say that the wall is probably the most important thing of the entire buff, though. It just helps your pathing so much. It allows you to avoid pulling the villagers at the very beginning with a lot of the trash. That's otherwise pretty annoying. The second checkpoint's more or less whatever. But having access to the second checkpoint's not something to scoff at either. And so I think that having a combo of Druid, Nelf, Tauren, High Mountain Tauren, and hopefully they fix Herbalism, but Herbalism should be fairly solid. For high-end groups, pretty much everybody's going to have a Nelf in your group, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But this is a very valuable Dwarf season, so it might be something that you see infrequently as the season goes on. And it's something that it's like kind of difficult to get whenever you're pugging. Just sniffing out those race, class, profession combos, not necessarily the most popular thing. So we'll see. Last thing I want to talk about was the Necrotic Wake buffs. They're not marked in MDT, so I wanted to take a second to kind of draw on screen and kind of show you guys where all the buffs were and what they are. So J is marked with Javelin, so this is that blue one. S is marked with Shield, this is that red one. And A is marked with the Anima Sphere, and that is the white one. Let's talk about kind of what these weapons do. First and foremost, the Javelin. Bloody Javelin, probably the strongest buff in here. It makes the mobs take 20% increased damage. This is a stacking effect, and so that means that you can multiply them together with one another if you throw multiple javelins at a singular boss or trash pack or whatever. It can AoE as well, so it's not something that is just a single target effect, but it's a little bit weird. So you have to like throw it through the mobs to be able to have multiple of them bleed. It also does a little bit of damage, but it's not like an insane amount. It's, you know, maybe a couple 100,000 DPS type beat. Shield, pretty strong, 20% DR whenever you press it. You can use this at various times in the dungeon. We, at some points, were using the shield for, like, one of these shields right here. We would be using it for, like, tank DR inside the first pull of the dungeon. Something like that. Maybe use that whenever we were doing this large trash pull. That was potentially possible whenever we were looking to on how to use these shields. In the past, it would require a channel for the full duration, but that's no longer the case. You just press it and it goes off. Now, for these anima orbs that you have over here, all these anima orbs, what they do is they do a pulsing AoE silence. There's a couple of mobs here that are casters now, which you have the necromancers, and then you have the ads that spawn from a Marth. And so, of course, these anima orbs are fairly strong. Additionally, if you pull like Narzuda, if you pull this pack right here, I think that committing one or maybe even potentially two of these anima orbs to this pull is something that I would describe it as almost a necessity. And so that's going to be pretty important. What I will say, and this is probably the most important thing, is this Javelin right here is actually gated behind pulling this pack of trash. And so you actually end up pulling this Necromancer with these double Marauder pull. And so this is actually a pull that you should be looking to do to be able to optimize the amount of buffs. So let's talk about how to use these buffs inside these dungeons. I think that universally the triple javelin, the best way to use the triple javelin is to Zerg Surgeon Stitch Flash. You use triple javelin once you hook him off the platform and you try to kill him as fast as possible. Do not let him get a bunch of up phases. Potentially you have to kill fewer A-bombs whenever you do it like this. The shields in the anima orb, I think that the second most difficult part of this dungeon is a Marth, the second boss in this instance. And so I think that actually committing all of the anima orbs potentially and all of your shields potentially to this boss is very good. The anima orbs are good for getting the mages grouped up on top of the boss, and the shields are good after the boss does his consumption phase. The boss starts pulsing for AoE. Additionally, whenever he then summons mobs, there are some mobs that are called crossbowmen, and they do a little bit of ambient group-wide damage with an ability called Shoot that you can't really avoid. And so stacking up, pressing this shield on the remainder of your group is very positive. Yeah, and so I think that those are all the buffs in Necrotic Wake. Those are just additionally just how I think you should be looking to use them as a whole. And so that's it. That's all the extracurricular buffs that I know about in any of the dungeons. I hope this helps you guys so much whenever you guys are starting off on the season, trying to understand what the buffs do, where they are, and why they're kind of important. I hope to see you guys in the next video, and I hope you like and subscribe. Goodbye.